Have you ever met one of those people who just can't be stopped? It's like they're unstoppable.
Yeah, I have.
Me too.
What's their mystique?
Nothing stops these people.
Don't stop.
Welcome to Mission Unstoppable with Coach Frankie Picasso. You're about to meet some of the most amazing people.
Stop. Don't stop.
They've accomplished their goals despite insurmountable odds. They beat adversity, physical hardship, and traumatic events, and emerged triumphantly. They're people just like you and me, and they're winners. Are you unstoppable? Here's Frankie to show you how.
Hello there, and welcome to Mission Unstoppable Radio. Our guest guide today will be taking us on a mission to a place where we all go, but none of us return. Okay, I'm having a little bit of fun with you, but Yvonne Heath has been a registered nurse since 1988. She's worked in Louisiana, Texas, New York State, and today she lives in Huntsville, Ontario. She's worked in both management and hands-on nursing. Her career has been varied. She's nursed in obstetrics, chemotherapy, emergency medicine, as well as hospice care. But at age 50, Yvonne chose a new career path. She became an author, speaker, radio host, and workshop facilitator for a topic that she's most passionate about: death. Her book is titled Love Your Life to Death, and today her purpose is to empower herself and others to live fully and die peacefully with few regrets. Welcome, Yvonne.
Thank you so much, Frankie.
Today. Yeah, what's the rest of that now? And become compassionate.
Yes, you said it all, actually. I feel like we can be done.
Oh, okay, done. Well, this is a topic, as you well know, scares a lot of people. We are scared to death of death. Absolutely. Yeah. So how did we become so death phobic as a society? It's interesting, really, when you think about it.
Well, Frankie, it is an interesting topic, and it took me stepping away from my nursing career to have the time and to also sort of look around and say, we really aren't well prepared to face grief, death, and dying. And of course, we face grief our whole lives. It's not only with death, but, with anything, a loss of a job, a divorce, friends moving, children leaving home. I mean, that truly can break someone's heart, and yet we just don't talk about these things at the dinner table, and we are very ill prepared, and we just need to create change and bring this topic to conversation, and we can learn from each other.
I mean, we've sanitized everything, though, haven't we? We sanitized, people don't know what that meat in a package at the grocery store. Yeah. Was that really an animal? Like, what kind of animal was, and what do they look like? Because I've never seen one. So everything is kind of sanitized. I think about the Vikings, going off to a good death, and the Egyptians taking their whole family and their servants, everyone with them as they die.
Absolutely.
They really thought about death, and as a society, everybody came out and sent them off to Valhalla and sent them off to here and there. Yes, we have funerals, but it's not the same.
Well, the thing is, and to go back to your question, which I often get very passionate and I start talking about other things, but how we became death phobic, and of course there's many ways in which we have been led down this path unknowingly. And I love that you said about sanitize our society, because one of the people I interviewed for my book was Minister Derek Shelley, and he says, we have sanitized our society.
Oh, did he?
Yes, I quoted that in my book. And the thing is that our elderly used to live among us, and right. Medical technology was very limited, right? So two things, people mostly lived on farms, so life and death of the animals was just a part of our everyday. And also, people were born at home and people died at home. There was nowhere else to go. And of course, if someone was dying, the doctor came by with his little bag of goodies and very limited, super technology. And so you didn't have these really unrealistic expectations. And today, with our incredible advancements in medical technology, which are often miraculous, and people can be, brought back to a quality life, but we sometimes take quality of life out of the equation, and we want people to live no matter what their life is going to look like. We've really lowered the standard on quality because we can keep people alive for a very long time.
Right. And we do that with our pets too.
Oh,
but
goodness.
what was there one incident that happened where you kind of had a wake up and go, I need to do this. I need to talk to people about death?
Yeah, well, and it's interesting because it was sort of, when you're supposed to, your passion and your purpose, I believe we're all here for whatever we're supposed to be, and it just keeps knocking on the door until you answer. That's right. And it does. And so in my career, I was getting more and more anxious. And in the last 10 years, I was in chemotherapy. And, wonderful doctors and nurses and everyone certainly did their best to have these conversations or to help people navigate these conversations. Now, some didn't at all. But people didn't want to talk about this. And I would become so anxious when someone was dying and no one was really talking about it, and it seemed like there was this bubble of denial, and often, families would just not want to have the conversation, and the parts that just started to chip away at my soul were like when patients would take me to the side and say, I really don't want to do chemo anymore. I don't want to have this operation. And I'd say, oh, my goodness, please tell your family. Please tell your doctor. And they're like, no, they don't want me to give up. And that was really painful. So I started to suffer. Yes, I started to suffer excessively and feel like, we could be creating more great end-of-life scenarios by acknowledging that this is where we are, and let's create as much quality with how much time is left as opposed to hanging on to extending life, but at the expense of quality of that person, what they want. Right. They didn't want it. It's not up to me. And that's what, I've been told, well, you can't instill your values on other people. I said, no, this is what they're telling me. Right. Yeah. That's what they're telling me.
My stepmom died of pancreatic cancer, and she went through chemo. She went through it 3 times, and it was the 3rd time when she told my dad, she goes, that's it, I'm not doing it anymore. And he's, and they're like, okay. And hospice came to the house, and she died at home, and, we all went to say goodbye to her. And that was really special, actually. Yes. It was very special time. And,
I'm happy to hear that your dad was able to honor, when she said, I've had enough. Because that's, and then it is time for goodbyes. And, I always tell people we always have choices. We don't always have the choices we wish we had. Everyone would wish she didn't have pancreatic cancer. That's right. You didn't have that choice, but you do have the choice of what you do with this time. And so you created a good death where hospice was involved and she died at home. And that's what I wish for everyone. Truly.
She had a lot of revelations, which was really interesting at the end of life. And I do want to talk about, that and where he went from there, because there was a lot of anger directed towards him. And we'll get into that in a little bit. But I do want to say her book is called Love Your Life to Death. It is a fantastic book. I did read the whole book, by the way.
Thank you.
You're welcome. And I loved how you started the book. Yeah. It was a really great intro. And talk about the gentleman, the first story. Talk about him. He was an amazing guy.
Well, and it's such a funny story, and it's just so perfect that it ended up being the introduction to my book. And if I could step back, it's hilarious because here I am. At the time, I was almost 50. I have not written, I haven't journaled, I haven't written an essay since college, which I probably didn't even get a very good mark on. And, as I'm doing this soul searching, and this pop-up came up, and it said, how to write a best-selling book. And I said, honey, that's it. I'm going to write a book. I'm going to leave my nursing career and write a book. And the poor guy, my husband's so great, Jordy, and he's just like, okay, honey. And I'm sure he walked away going, oh, dear God, don't leave your nursing career to write a book. You're not a writer. But what I said and what I realized was that I didn't want statistics and I didn't want surveys. I wanted people's stories, but I didn't know if they'd share them. So I put out one message.
And you are a writer. You are a writer.
Thank you. But I wasn't before, so, it's so extraordinary to find this out. Yes. And so I put out one email and I said, okay, so I'm going to write this book, and it's about, our death-phobic society and how our reluctance to talk about, plan, and prepare causes excessive suffering. Would anyone share a story with me? And, I pressed send, and I thought, I don't even know if people will share their stories. one of the people that, and people, stories were coming in droves. I was like very overwhelmed, and people were calling.
Where
I want
did
to
you
talk
post
to you about
this?
I just sent out an email and Facebook message. That's it.
Wow.
Oh, yeah, that was it. And so one of the people that did come to my house was a nurse named Sue, who I worked with in Emerge in Huntsville. Mm-hmm. And it was dark, and it was January, and she had worked, and she was tired, and she had her puppy with her because she couldn't leave it at home. And she said, I'm not even really sure why I'm here, but I'm going to tell you about my dad. And I said, okay, well, let's sit down. I had no idea where this story was going to go. And she told me the story of Homer, her dad. And do you want me to talk about Homer?
I want you to talk about
briefly?
Homer. We've got 2 minutes to our break, though, just to give you an idea. So if you want to talk about it, yeah.
Yes, well, Homer was a very special person who lost his sight at the age of 17 in an accident, but that certainly didn't stop him from living his life fully. He married, had 5 children, and blazed a trail for people with disabilities. And he just lived a very full, beautiful, philosophical life. But when he knew he was dying, he said, that's it, no more treatment, it's time to plan my death. And he was so gracious. He had lockets engraved for his daughters. He had letters written. He even wrote his eulogy and had his daughter practice it.
Oh,
and
my
so
gosh.
and he had her bring a tie to the hospital so he could knot it properly and pick out a new suit. And so when it was his time to die, his daughters were at his bedside and holding his hand, and his daughter said, Dad, jump. And the sister, confused at first, said, yeah, Dad, jump. With his loving daughters at his side, a life well planned and a death well planned, he did. And it's so funny because that story makes me cry every time I've told it a thousand times.
It's a beautiful story.
It is a beautiful story, and I'm so honored that Homer is now a part of my legacy, and I love to share his story.
We're going to go to a break, and hopefully listeners, stick around, don't go anywhere. We're going to come back. We're going to talk about death and about living and about what you can do to erase your fears of death and live a good life and have a good death, because that's, what is important. And it's an interesting, and we'll talk about people's beliefs, because beliefs are very important in how you die, I think. So don't go anywhere. We're coming right back. Yvonne Heath is our guest today. She's the author of, what's your book called? Love Your Life to Death.
Love Your Life to Death.
Coach Frankie Picasso will continue right after these messages.
Stop.
Have you heard? The pages of American Patchwork and Quilting magazine come to life on our new weekly online radio show, American Patchwork and Quilting. Join Pat Sloan, our blogging and quilt designer host, as she talks about the latest trends, ideas, and inspirations. Her guests include quilt pattern designers, authors, quilt shop owners, and our editors, all quilters, just like you. Call in with your questions. Get quilting tips from industry experts. Learn about free patterns. Hear behind-the-scenes stories from our magazines, American Patchwork and Quilting, Quilt Sampler, and Quilts and More. Get the scoop on free stuff and find out more about the best independent quilt shops in North America. To listen to a live show, tune in Monday at 4 p.m. Eastern. Just log on to allpeoplequilt.com/radio. To hear past shows, go to iTunes and search for American Patchwork and Quilting Radio. We hope you'll join us because we know that quilting changes everything.
This is the TogiNet Radio Network, radio with a cutting edge.
Close your eyes and imagine living your life without limits. Where would you go? Who would you meet? What would you do? During an Uncover Your Hidden Genius session, you will discover what's keeping you from living your life with purpose, passion, and fulfillment of your potential. You'll get a clear vision of the steps you need to take to uncover your hidden genius so that you can live a life without limits. Sessions can be done over the phone, Skype, or in person. Find out more at www.joycebufordempowers.com or by calling 903-287-0747.
I am your host, Frankie Picasso. You are listening to Mission Unstoppable Radio, and my guest today is Yvonne Heath, and she's the author of Love Your Life to Death. We are talking about death. What are your thoughts about dying and death, and what about your family, your beliefs? Have you ever talked about it as a whole, as a family? Have you written a will? What are you doing out there, people? You let us know. Anyway, Yvonne, in your book, one thing I found was interesting. You went through the different kinds of fears and phobias about death, but one phobia that was really interesting to me was the phobia about people who are afraid of senior citizens.
Yes. I know, isn't that, I felt, my heart felt a little sick. Well, and it's interesting because at first I kind of felt enraged because I thought, well, how ridiculous. But, if you are never exposed to, again, the elderly used to live among us, right? And so, some people do not have grandparents. Either they have died or they live far away or they're not close, whatever, and they're just truly never around the elderly. So when you go to a nursing home, sadly, some of them are very overwhelming and they might not smell great, and there's a lot of elderly people, and maybe some of them are hard of hearing, so they're loud and they're with walkers. And it truly, really reminds us of the fact that we age, and for some people it's just a link to end of life.
Right.
And like you see, I've raised my children we used to go singing at the nursing homes, and they'd sit on grandma's knee, and hug them. And so I think that, it's, again, instead of being angry with the way people are, I want to empower people. Say, yeah, I get it. You've never been exposed. Well, let's create a culture of change here. Intergenerational communication. We need to get back to that.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think that, I'm fortunate. My dad is 91, but he's a very young 91.
Nice.
And, the guy who lost his wife probably within 2 months got another girlfriend half his age.
Oh, half his age. Wow. Good.
My age, actually.
Wow. Look at him.
And everybody was angry with him. And I thought, my dad you've lived 91 years. You know how to live. And he's always lived forward. He's never lived back. He's never regretted. So he never has his eyes going backward. Never. He's always going forward. And he said, look, you know what? She was dying for 3 years. We've grieved. We've already grieved.
That's right.
She died already, during that time. And so, putting her in the ground was just the final stage.
Well, exactly. And, really when we are in a place where we're judging others, we don't know anybody's path. And it is very exhausting, and it just takes away from your own joy when you're looking at someone else and saying, oh, he shouldn't be doing that. She shouldn't be doing that. And
they all said that. And I thought, you know what? He's 90 years old or 80 years old or 89, however old he was at the time. She died, somewhere late 80s. Yep. And I thought, hey, how much time do you want him to have? He's
you know what? If he has the opportunity to have another kick at the cat, let the man have it.
Yeah.
Seriously.
Why can't he have a happy end of life?
Oh,
yes.
That's and you don't choose these things either. I'm sure he wasn't out there, or it doesn't matter if he was. Maybe he was lonely. It doesn't matter. That is his life and his journey. And I think that I try to tell people, instead of always seeing what your neighbor's doing and how they're keeping their yard, cut your own grass and worry about your own yard and bring the best version of yourself to the table and fulfill your own life. Don't worry about what anyone else is doing.
Well, in your book, it was interesting because you have people who died happy and people who died very sad. And, and the sad deaths were the people who were really closed off from themselves, closed off from life, closed off from family members who wanted to, offer them compassion. They weren't interested.
No.
They were just closed. So, as a nurse and a healthcare provider, what is your advice to these people who are so closed? Like, how can you open them? Can you open them?
Well, it's interesting because what I sort of say with my mission is I aspire to create a culture of change and change the next generations coming up. With a lot of us, it's a lot of damage control. So if I can get in there and have a few aha moments with some people. But the one thing that, I say to people, by being so closed and everything and you love everybody so much, they're suffering more. Silence and isolation and not talking about what is happening creates excessive suffering in a situation that's already sad. And I have the absolute perfect example. We just came from visiting a doctor who is young, and he has been diagnosed with cancer, and he is in the hospital right now, and he has an infection, and he's quite ill, and he can't come home at this point, and he has young daughters. Do you know what he's doing? There's this site called Caring Bridge where you can share, your medical journey, because, of course, a lot of people want to know what is happening. Mm-hmm. What is he doing? Right from the get-go, here he is, a doctor in our community, sharing everything. He's sharing everything. He's like, you know what? Today I had a hard day, and he actually he had to have an operation, and he said, I'm infected here, and this is happening, and my bowels aren't working. And I just started laughing. I said, good for him. He's just putting it out there. So much as it's difficult for his family, not talking about these things is so much more painful. We're just compounding the pain. So I said,
and when we hide the kids away from it, that's got to be the worst thing somebody can do is to, they think that they're protecting their children, but they're actually adding to the suffering, and years of therapy.
Oh, my gosh. Well, what they're creating is death-phobic children and death-phobic adults in the making. And, when people ask me about that, I said, at the end of the day, you need love, you need gratitude, and you need to tell the truth. Because when you don't tell the truth, and, there is one nurse that has cancer and she hasn't told her children. And when I hear that, it causes me anxiety. I say, those children know something is wrong. They can't not know. They're going to know. And, they're probably silently grieving, but they can't give it a voice because nobody's talking about it.
Yeah.
And the problem is that, we're a society, we want to fix things.
Yep.
And sure, but when we can't, we're just so uncomfortable that we just sometimes just avoid, suffer, and repeat. This is what we do because we're not good with being uncomfortable. And when I tell people, if someone's grieving or having a hard time, just show up for them. Oh, but it's uncomfortable. I said, heck yes, it is. Absolutely. Mm-hmm. Show up anyways. I don't know what to say. Well, say that. I don't know. I would, like I said, my magic words, I walk in, usually start crying and say, this really sucks, and hug, and I'm messy, and mascara's running down my face, and I don't care because I just lead with my heart. Right. And we have to allow children that opportunity as well, which is ironic because my children learned so much from the death of our pug named Frankie.
Yeah, I read that. Aww.
But,
she was fugly.
She was a not beautiful dog, but she was a beautiful dog on the inside.
Right. Yeah. Good heart.
She did.
Good heart. Ben, are you there? Yeah, you must be. You're producing the show.
Yes, I am.
I want to know, when Ben was a Marine and you went overseas, and when you guys went overseas, what was your thought about death and your families? How did you have a conversation about what would happen if I died over there?
No, I think more what happened is we just kind of accepted that I might not come home.
Okay.
Which actually caused problems later down the road when I came back. But
they'd already given your stuff away, or what?
No, it's just with my wife and I. She had already in her heart, let me go.
Oh no!
But not in a bad way. It's hard to explain.
But so she had to redevelop the intimacy for you. Is that
not really that? Just learn to relax and just
go
with things.
Because I wonder, if soldiers have that conversation or the talk as you talk about, Yvonne, in your book, if before you leave, or with families, or does the military talk to you about dying, anything like that?
They didn't really, but by the point that I left, we were so desensitized by death that it was okay. Let's go.
Really?
Not really nervous.
But not in your own family, though, right? That's a very different thing, isn't it? And your family may not have been well prepared for grief, death, and dying.
They do actually have, especially in the Marine Corps, a good system. It's called the Key Volunteer System. And it's a bunch of, it's like a wives, well, it's spouses, but where they can connect to each other. So if one is having a hard time, she could connect to her key volunteer, and then from there get the help that she needs, or just someone to talk to.
So you're talking about when somebody dies.
Yeah, or if someone gets hurt, or if there's just any emotional turmoil.
Right.
Like,
but I'm thinking from a mother's perspective that my child's gone to war, and it's to lose a child has to be, I don't even want to think about it because I don't want to manifest anything like that. But, I know that would be like the very worst thing that could ever happen to me.
Absolutely. And, when we're talking about it, and it's funny because I am going to be doing a talk at a military base very soon. And my whole point is when we talk about in our society how important prevention is. We talk about prevention with sex stuff and cardiac stuff and this stuff and that stuff, but we don't talk about plan and prepare, develop coping skills and strategies when it comes to grief, death, and dying. And we don't talk about what are your beliefs about life and death, what is going to help to create a soft landing for you when grief arrives. Because grief is the price of loving sometimes, but it's worth it, and your heart will heal if you take good care of it. But we don't talk about prevention. It's always after. It's the same thing as, PTSD and depression and all of these issues. I mean, grief is part of life, and I feel very strongly, I'm not saying none of it would ever happen, but if we talked about and had all of this done beforehand, if something like that develops, I feel that people could navigate through it with greater ease or with skills already in place.
Yeah. Yeah.
So we talk about it after, and it's a lot harder to fix something after it's broken.
This is true.
Yes.
We're going to go to commercial break in a little bit less than a minute. When we come back, I want to talk about planning death and the beliefs, some of the beliefs that, you've heard about that people have, and the ones that feel the most comforting and strange, maybe.
Yeah.
That'd be kind of fun, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And,
of course, it's all fun.
Yeah.
I'm fun. You're fun. See, it's good.
That's right. We're fun, and we're talking about death. So
That's
don't be
right.
scared. Don't be afraid. It's all good.
It's all good.
And it gets easier as you get older, I think, to talk about death.
Oh, not for some people.
No?
So I think that their death phobia comes at all ages, and sometimes it's so deeply rooted you can't even crack it.
Okay, well, we're off the airwaves in just a moment. We have to pay some bills, but we are going to come back. So don't go anywhere, folks. You can go to the bathroom if you have to.
Stoppable with Coach Frankie Picasso will continue right after these messages.
Stop.
In today's business world, a helping hand or idea that doesn't come with an invoice is a treasured find. And if that happens to you, then you need to pay it forward to keep other entrepreneurs from making mistakes or getting a raw deal. It's called Paying It Forward with Josephine Girassi, Wednesday mornings at 9 a.m. Central. Josephine is going to have the guests describe their accomplishments, the lessons they've learned, both good and bad, and then sharing those pieces of knowledge as we create a movement of paying it forward. For more information about Josephine, her business, and background, you can go to mymomknowsbest.com. Josephine Girassi has always been a problem solver. She saw this need and has turned it into a movement. It's Paying It Forward with tips, tools, and advice and hard lessons learned. These pieces of knowledge can make a huge difference for you, your business, and others. So join us for Paying It Forward with Josephine Girassi, Wednesday mornings at 10 a.m., 9 a.m. Central on TogiNet.com.
It's the Fitness Minute with fitness expert Annette Hammond.
When eating out, sushi is a wise choice. The Mayo Clinic says that most types of seafood are relatively low in calories and are full of nutritional benefits. The calories in sushi vary depending on the dish and how it's prepared. In fact, the same sushi dish may have a different nutritional profile when it's prepared by a different chef or made in a certain restaurant. This depends on the specific mix of ingredients. Generally, though, sushi can be included in a healthy eating plan. To reduce the calories in your sushi meal, avoid anything prepared with mayonnaise or added sauce. Begin your meal with low-calorie soup. Pass over the shrimp tempura rolls and choose the cucumber rolls instead. Be sure to order the sushi without any rice at all, because 1 cup of cooked white rice has about 240 calories. I'm Annette Hammond.
Okay, and we're back. Hello and welcome. Thank you for sticking around. You're listening to Mission Unstoppable, and our Unstoppable guide today is Yvonne Heath, and we're talking about death and dying and having a good death and what that means. So what are some of the good death, Yvonne, what are some of the good death journeys that people think is going to happen that you've heard?
That they think is going to happen or that I've seen happen?
Well, both.
Well, I, of course, always go right to my lovely Kevin, who I interviewed his mom for my book because Kevin was younger than me, and that's, when I also started.
Kevin was the one who did Santa?
Yes.
Yes. Okay.
Yes, I love him so much, and once again, so honored to be able to have him honored in my book and part of my legacy. But, he just took his diagnosis. He was in his 40s, so he was younger than me. He took his diagnosis in stride, and, you kind of kept waiting for it's like, okay, this guy's he's too happy, he's too this, we're waiting. But, he wasn't in denial. He just kind of had his private grieving, I have no doubt, but he would come to the chemo clinic and cheer everybody up. And he would have great conversations with all the patients, and everybody just left smiling if Kevin was there that day. And then the chemo stopped working. And, I could feel, once again, I was devastated.
Right.
I was like, I couldn't believe it, and this is awful, and he's just the sweetest guy. And finally I just said, Kevin, you've got to tell me. How do you keep up this attitude, and you're helping, and you're so wonderful? And he just looked at me and said, well, what are you going to do? I said, wow, that's just so extraordinary.
That is incredible. It is extraordinary because, part of you feels like he is in denial or something, or why did you give up? But he didn't.
No,
he was just...
He didn't give up. What he wanted to do, his father had died 5 years before, and so he was very close to his mom, and he knew that here's his mom now is going to lose her son. Yes. How awful. And you know what? It was more important for him to empower her to be able to move through her grief. And they used to go for walks and talk about it, and she told me that she got through it because they could talk about it, and that's what he wanted for her, and they had conversations about it. She said, I would have never talked about it, but he wanted to, and he wanted me to be okay, so I'm okay, and now she volunteers at hospice.
Oh, good for her.
Are you kidding? Beautiful. And
God bless him.
I did write that I went to see him in his final journey. He ended up at the hospital, and I just walked in, and once again, my very professional self, I walked in and fell apart, and I was blubbering and crying, and he's comforting me. He's like, it's okay. I said, okay, great. Now you're comforting me. That's awesome. You're comforting me because I'm upset because you're dying. And we just laughed, and I cried, and he cried, and it was messy and wonderful. And, we can create that, and I did write that there are opportunities in the dying process to empower those who are left behind.
You've seen a lot of people die, I imagine.
What's that?
I said, I'm sure you've seen a lot of people actually die.
Well, when I started writing this, I thought, am I really qualified? Have I really been involved in that many deaths? And so I started writing down names, and I stopped at 100.
Oh, my gosh, Yvonne.
I thought, okay, now I understand why perhaps I've suffered because I was not well prepared for this. Yeah. And that's a lot of deaths.
That is a lot of deaths.
It is. I've seen a lot of deaths, and now I realize why.
Has death, when you look at the majority, and this is going to be an odd question, but when you look at the majority of the death, has a lot of the death been a struggle in the dying process? Like the actual end of minutes? Or are they peaceful, or is it painful, or the struggle, in your experience?
In my experience. So, again, a lot of that struggle comes from people not wanting to let go and people wanting to continue having treatment when their bodies are tired and they've had enough, right? And so when we continue to inflict treatments on someone's body that is ready to die, that can be painful and that much more difficult. If someone is in the dying process and we are allowing a natural death, then, you can have hospice and a palliative care team, and they're wonderful with pain management and allowing, this process to be. Because one other thing that would make it more painful is when people don't want someone to be, quote unquote, out of it, so they don't want them to have too much pain medication. I said, well, once again, we have a choice here. We either have, grandma's not going to be able to talk because she has a lot of pain medication on board, but she's not in pain, or you're not giving enough and she's suffering. So to me, there are worse things than end of life, which we will all face.
Aren't we?
Well, yes, we are. And you know what else is selfish is not planning your life and end of life. That is selfish because somebody has to plan your death. If it's not you.
I want to talk about when my mother died in 2002. I have no religion at this moment. But my family was Jewish, and my brother said we were going to sit Shiva, and I go, I don't understand that. Why are we going to do that? Like, I don't want to do that. And I didn't understand it. But we did it. We sat the 7 days, and, I was inconsolate. I cried, and then, about the third, fourth day, people are coming, and you're starting to tell good stories, and you're laughing. And by that 7th day, I was able to leave and not feel enormous grief any longer. And it was just perfect that they had the right amount of time. Like somehow they knew,
Interesting. Well, and what you did in that time frame was allow your grief and allow laughter, right? Because it doesn't have to be one or the other. No. And we just have to allow whatever emotion is showing up. And sometimes it's anger, which is something difficult for people to wrap their head around because being angry is part of grief as well. And we look and we say, oh, Joe's being a real, whatever. Yeah. But, maybe Joe's grieving.
And it's fear, too. Anger comes with fear.
And yes. And, just having these conversations and allowing for the grieving to move through their deepest grief and get to the other side it's so important, and that's why it's so empowering. I mean, I have planned my end of life. I talk about grief, death, and dying with our 11-year-old twins, Jaden and Tanner. They are a part of all of this. We are making decisions about, I had mentioned to you that our black lab is now nearing end of life, and we are sitting as a family, the four of us. Our older son is out in Kelowna, and we're talking about what we're going to do and saying, the conversation is, so Kuba is nearing end of life, and we don't want him to suffer. We're not really sure what this is going to look like. And they made this decision that they want him buried in the yard, and we are making a sacred pet space. Nice. And I'll make myself cry if I keep talking about it. But anyway, so
I was with my Sammy and he was put down. I almost let him go too long, but I took him and we put him down. And one of my sons came with me, and we both hugged him and stroked him and told him how much we love him until he passed. And it was really beautiful.
Yes,
in its way. And of course, I do have his ashes, but
well,
eventually they're going to have to go somewhere.
And and sometimes we do need to hang on. Who, me?
Yeah.
Yes. I mean, and it's funny because that would be my choice at this point, and then spread my ashes in all the places that I loved, and do whatever you need to do to heal in this process. But what I would like to explore is these natural burial places where, I think that's the best option.
I just watched that video. Yeah, I watched the documentary on that. Yeah, and I love that idea.
Yeah,
I love that idea.
See, because we are as a society so attached to the physical, right? And if you can get your belief, and as I wrote, of course, spirituality forgotten. It doesn't have to be a religion, but a spiritual of something. Believe something that will create comfort in life and at the end of life. And know that this physical body, I mean, this is just like a loan. This is a temporary thing, you know. Yeah. This is our vehicle. So that whatever that energy, that spirit inside lives on. So you don't have to be at a gravesite. You don't have to hold on to the physical to stay connected to that person. No. You know, I don't even think
I've been back to that gravesite for a long time. But you know, I don't know if you know, I'm a metaphysical hypnotherapist, so I do past lives. And I believe in past life. I do. I totally believe in past life. Yeah. And I believe, you know, a whole bunch of weird stuff that a lot of people will think is kind of bizarre.
Oh, my mom would love you.
But I've seen evidence, and I like that. I like that. And I interviewed Dr. Pima Chatwater. She wrote a book called she interviewed over 4,000 people who had near-death experiences and how those went. And some were very horrible, and some were amazing. And she said it was just the beliefs and the guilt that they felt as they died that took them to, there's no heaven or hell, but took them to kind of a dark place. Yeah. And even children. And that was that really bothered me a little bit. But it's interesting, you know, the experiences that people have. But I totally believe in past lives. What freaks me out a little bit is just not knowing that I'll never be me again. I know. Right? And that's such a weird concept. Like,
it is a weird concept.
Yeah, very strange.
It is.
Okay. But, here we are, death and dying. But I do like the natural burials. If people haven't heard about it, there's a documentary, I think it's on Netflix, that you can watch about a doctor who chose it with his wife, his own burial, and he designed his own burial, as you were talking about. And I'm not 100% sure. But what about you? I know that you want to give the gift of life and have donated parts of your body. Is it all parts of your body, or just certain parts of your body? Like, what about people who are afraid to do that? What's your advice?
Well, again, I say that you need to step back and reflect on what is it about it that makes you afraid. And I think that, again, that's part of being attached to the physical, you know, and I think, well, you know, I mean, the options are really, you're either buried or you're cremated. I mean, neither of those are like warm, fuzzy options for your physical self. So to me, I just say, you know what, take whatever you need and leave the rest. Yeah. I have no qualms about that. And, you know, I'm trying to empower myself. And, I mean, the thought of any of those things, I mean, I don't like to think about any of those options, but I want to bring the best option, because, once again, we can't always choose everything, but we can choose to do something. And out of any tragedy or sadness or, I mean, look at you with, you know, everything you've gone through, and now you're choosing to be this powerhouse, unstoppable woman. I mean, that's extraordinary. So when I die...
I'm going to stop you there. Because we're going to go to a break.
Oh, okay.
And when we come back, I want to hear about what happens when you die. And then I want to talk about the kinds of questions we need to ask ourselves and our loved ones when we have to talk, and how to have a good death. Okay? Keep that in mind.
Excellent.
Okay, excellent too. So stick around. We'll be right back.
Picasso will continue right after these messages.
Stop.
Close your eyes and imagine living your life without limits. Where would you go? Who would you meet? What would you do? During an Uncover Your Hidden Genius session, you will discover what's keeping you from living your life with purpose, passion, and fulfillment of your potential. You'll get a clear vision of the steps you need to take to uncover your hidden genius so that you can live a life without limits. Sessions can be done over the phone, Skype, or in person. Find out more at www.joycebufordempowers.com or by calling 903-287-0747.
It's the Fitness Minute with fitness expert Annette Hammond.
Can muscle turn into fat? It sure looks like it can, but the reality is it can't. When you have tight and defined muscles and you quit working out with weights or exercising at all in some cases, it seems like your hard muscle turns to flab. Remember, muscle and fat are two different entities, and one cannot turn into another. What happens is when you stop exercising, your muscle fibers grow smaller, while your fat cells grow larger. With exercise, your muscles make the fibers grow, and when you stop exercising, they reduce in size. Likewise, your body's fat cells can change in size depending on how much fat each one stores. So keep your body fit, healthy, and strong. Keep up your exercise, and don't let conditioned muscles become flabby. For the Fitness Minute, I'm Annette Hammond.
And you're listening to Mission Unstoppable Radio. I am your host, Frankie Picasso. My guest today is Yvonne Heath. And if you want to go to her website, do so, www.loveyourlifetodeath.com. There you go. And if you want to write to Yvonne, Yvonne at loveyourlifetodeath.com. So, Yvonne, just before we went to break, we wanted to talk to you about the kinds of questions that families and individuals need to ask are themselves first, and then to talk about, the talk with their families. So what are the main things that we need to think about when we're planning our good death?
Yeah, and it is it's such an individual thing, and that's why, in this busy world, we do not like to take time for introspection, and this stuff seems so unnecessary. But as I've said before, somebody needs to plan your end of life, your life and your end of life, and it should be you. So I think the true, before even talking to any family, is stepping back and saying to yourself, what are my values and what do I believe and what is important to me as far as, would I want a religious ceremony? Would I want, to be in a canoe and going down the lazy river? And what would be meaningful to me? But then the other very important piece to that is writing that all down and then having the conversation with your family and seeing if they're okay with that. Mm-hmm. Because they're the ones that are going to have to move through grief, right? So let's say you have a family member who just, I don't know, for whatever reason, cremation, they just can't deal with it, and you're saying you want to be cremated. Well, that's great, but have that conversation with that family and come to an understanding and, this is what's important to me and how do you feel about that? And that's often where people stop is they write down their wishes and they say, well, my wishes are all written down in a vault somewhere. And it's like, well, Dad, how do I even get in the vault? Oh, well, okay, That's a good, right? So it's so important to look at what you believe, what you value, what's really important to you. And it's interesting because I had a friend who, she's 35 and she has written every detail out because, yes, and her mom thought that was a crazy idea because she's so young. And I thought, isn't that interesting? Because, I hate to burst the bubble, but we don't all die of old age.
No,
and we don't all die of disease. So we don't always get a warning. So let's talk about plan and prepare when we're young and healthy.
I don't even know what I want. That's my problem. I don't know what I want.
No. But, but that's okay then. Because then that means when you're, if your family has to grieve you, because, someone's generally going first. But if you don't know what you want, then your family can say, okay, Frankie didn't know what she wanted, so this is what I want. And that's got to be okay because that's the whole,
the main thing that we don't want is we don't want our family to fight over stuff. Stuff is like that's horrible.
Oh, my goodness. I did one talk, one of the keynote speaking, I went and this lady said, my husband and I, if we both die, our kids are going to fight over our house. My daughter's going to want to keep it. My son's going to want to sell it. And I said, well, wouldn't it be wonderful to sit down together right now, have that brawl, and write it all out in paper and figure it out now? Because once families are fractured over this, sometimes it's beyond repair.
Right.
And how sad, because so much of it could have been alleviated.
Yeah.
And my 35-year-old friend, she said, I want pallbearers and I want them to carry me out and this is who I want and everything. I'm like,
oh, wow.
I know. And I said, because I don't want pallbearers. Like, see, I don't. So sometimes we know what we don't want or do want. And, I think that whenever there's a change in our life, we should revisit it. So when I was a single parent with my son Tyler, I wrote out my wishes and who would, be responsible for Tyler and what I wanted, and I wrote out this big letter for him, and I've continued to do that. I did that with the twins as well. And I continue when there's a change, or I update, or I add a nice little letter to my kids, because that's part of my legacy.
Yeah.
And my legacy I want part of my legacy to be that I planned my life well and my end of life. And I just want to empower my family more than anything to move through their grief. So what are they going to need?
That's a very kind thought.
Yeah.
It really is a kind thought. You are kind. I've got twins too,
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yes, I got boy and girl.
So do I. How old are your twins?
My twins just turned 28.
Oh, my goodness. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Oh, wow. That's so cool.
That's funny.
Mine are just so little. They're so stinking cute, too.
Yeah. Yeah.
I have to say.
Well, I don't know. It's a difficult thing. It's a difficult thing to decide. It's not hard to give away stuff. That's the easy part. The hard part is really, for me, just, do I want to be cremated? Do I want to go here? What is it that I want? Deciding who's coming. Well, who knows who's going to come? Who knows if, they're still alive when you die? Who knows? Anything.
Right. But do you need to figure out who should come?
No.
Shouldn't it just be an open invitation?
It should. Yeah. Hopefully somebody will remember me and come. But
they will.
Yeah.
Of course they will. But, the thing is that it doesn't matter if you haven't figured all of this out. Then with your husband, say, I don't know, what would mean something to you? And, the more we have these conversations, because
he talks about it more than I do, because he really he's very, he's good with it. He goes, if I die today, I'm good. Like, I've had a great life and I'm good. And I'm like, I'm not, because I'm not done doing what I want to do.
And the thing is, but I say the same thing, Frankie. I aspire to live another 50 years because I'm so in love with what I'm doing. And my goal is to bring my book and my speaking across Canada. I want to empower compassionate professionals and communities and companies. And I say, I will be really disappointed. Well, that's the poem in my book. If I die today, I'll be really disappointed. But you know what? I want to let my kids know that I've had a great, wonderful, full 51 years. I aspire to have 50 more, but if I can't make, if I don't end up having that choice, know that I have loved my life and I've lived a full life. We can live a full life and, I want a few more decades, but I don't want to live in fear of not living as long as I want to either, right?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
And you want to have a good life. You do. You want to have a full life, one that you enjoy living, not just passing time. A funny story. My father-in-law asked my sister-in-law, she's a really amazing woodworker, to build him a coffin. And she built this beautiful coffin for him. Yeah. And her mother died. And her mother was a little bit taller than her dad. But they used that coffin for her.
Oh,
and she had to bring her from Utah into Oregon, where she buried her on her farm. So I think they got a permit, and I think the whole thing cost her like $47 to bury her mom.
Oh, my goodness. That's amazing.
Yeah. But it was kind of, they didn't know how they were going to fit her in this coffin because it was built for him.
Oh, geez.
Isn't that crazy? And at the time, 10 years, I guess, I was younger, and I thought, oh my God, I couldn't build a coffin for my dad. I don't even want to talk about things like that. But like I said to you earlier, as I get older, and I'm a lot older than you, as I get older, I find it easier to have that conversation. And not that I'm, hopefully not closer to death, but I am on that other side. And now it's like, I can talk about this without falling apart all the time.
Which is wonderful. But for some people, as they get older, it feels like death is closer and they become more reluctant, which is interesting. So it's very individual.
Yeah.
But, it's like anything. And I say to people, if this is hard for you to talk about now and you're not even facing death right now, imagine how much more difficult it will be when death is imminent or someone you love is dying. And, now you've got grief and anxiety and so much more on your plate. Some people say, I don't want to talk about that. I say, well, that's not good enough. And do it before all of this other stuff arrives, because it is so much anything. I mean, think about a birth. Who would say, well, I'm going to give birth in 9 months, but I'm not even going to think about it till it happens?
Right.
I mean, seriously, like, that's silly. We plan everything to the nth degree, graduations, weddings, and all of that. Plan your life, plan your death, and then just love your life to death.
Yeah, I mean, the one thing I would not want is my children burdened with the cost of my death, because that's just ridiculous.
Oh, my gosh, absolutely.
And the way the laws are about inheritance and taxes and everything, I mean, it's better to give your kids stuff now and let them enjoy it and enjoy watching them enjoy it, because that's the fun part for me.
Exactly. Yes, exactly. There was a lovely man, Mr. McDougall, who wrote about him as well. He was the candy man, and he was lovely. He didn't have children of his own, and when his wife was still living, he and his wife, he was like a grandfather to my husband and his sister. He gave them, Mr. McDougall and his wife gave them each $5,000 because they said, you know what, we don't have grandchildren. You've been like grandchildren to us. We'd like you to do this, take this money and do something wonderful. And we put hardwood floor in our house because of that money, and had him come over and see this beautiful floor that we were able to put in because of his gift. And he was delighted. So it's perfect to do that.
It's nice when it's not squandered, even though once you give money away, it's not your money anymore.
That's right.
It's nice to see that it was useful.
Yes, absolutely.
Very nice. So we've got about 2 minutes, Yvonne. Tell me, what is it that you really want to say to folks? I know you said a lot, but is there anything that we haven't said that you really want to impress upon them?
The best time to talk about, plan, and prepare for grief, death, and dying is when we are young and healthy, and the next best time is now. It will change your life so that you can live life more fully and die more peacefully.
So I highly encourage you to get Yvonne's book. Her name is Yvonne Heath, and it's Yvonne. The name of the book is Love Your Life to Death. You can go to her website, www.loveyourlifetodeath.com. You can email her at yvonne@loveyourlifetodeath.com, and you can listen to this broadcast again if you like. And hear all of those things again. If you want to share it with your families, that would probably be a great opener for you.
Yes, and I aspire to be a keynote speaker and workshop facilitator all over Canada.
And
so have book and car will travel.
There you go. So Yvonne will come and speak to your group. If you're at a church or you're at your office or anything, your military group, whatever, she'll come and she'll talk to you guys in a positive way about dying. And living. Absolutely. And a good life. Living well and dying well. Yeah. I think dying well is a good outcome. I think we all want to die well. Absolutely. Yvonne, thank you. Thank you so much, Frank. It's been wonderful. My pleasure to be on your show. You are a great guest. I'm sure you're a great radio host and workshop facilitator. So people can feel that energy coming from you. I'm sure that they are dying to have you. Pun intended, right? Pun intended. Thank you, Ben. Thank you so much. You've been listening to Mission Unstoppable. I am your host, Frankie Picasso. Come back and see us next week, every Tuesday at 1 p.m. Eastern. Thank you. Bye, Yvonne. Thank you so much. It's been delightful. You take care. Okay, you too. Bye for now. Bye. Don't stop.
When the chips were down, they didn't stop. Stories of people who, when the odds were against them, turned defeat into victory. You've been listening to Mission Unstoppable with Coach Frankie Picasso. See you next time, and always remember, don't stop.